So I just wanted to say today we meet on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Victoria, and we acknowledge all of the different lands where people are joining us from today. I acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners of this land. They belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world. They cared and protected country for thousands of years. We acknowledge that it is a privilege to stand on country and walk in the footsteps of those before us. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status, and to the Victorian Aboriginal community that continue to care for country here in Victoria, and for the other Aboriginal communities where you're joining us from today. At the Institute, we proudly stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really great to talk to everyone and to see how many people are interested in carbon neutrality in their practice, to see if they can get certified, and what the process involves and what some of our members have actually gone through in getting their practice certified as carbon neutral. So today we have a few different people joining us. I'll get them to unmute themselves and we can start the conversation. So we have, I believe, Bonnie Herring in the background from Breathe Architecture. Breathe is obviously a leader in this space of sustainability and architecture and urban development. And Bonnie will be telling us about her process getting Breathe certified as carbon neutral in Victoria. Andy Marlowe, the Director of Passive House Design and Construct Envirotecture. So he'll be joining us from New South Wales. And also Sophie Solomon, she's the principal of SSD Studio, who's had an evolving experience getting her practice certified as carbon neutral. So I just wanted everyone on the panel who can turn their microphones on, and we can start the conversation regarding how they started to go through that process. So Andy, Bonnie and Sophie, would you be able to turn your microphones on, and I'll hand over to you if we can.
Thanks, Dan. I'm afraid I'm limited by my device at this point, and I'm hoping that someone else can share the presentation.
Dan, do you have the presentation to share?
Yeah, I'll just open this up for us.
I think we would have ironed out all the kinks in Zoom by now, but I'm afraid back to my iPad issues.
I have to reload it.
Have you got it there, Daniel? Yes, I'm just trying to open it now.
Maybe I could start talking.
So yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so we've prepared a slideshow presentation looking at the three of our journeys from a large practice to a medium practice to a small practice. And we've done this, we've all been on the journey for a while, following the sort of acknowledgement that global warming is happening. And the recognition that as architects we have an ethical responsibility to play in reducing our carbon emissions as a business. I think we all know that the construction industry contributes nearly 40% to the global greenhouse gas emissions. And I think in terms of looking at how to become a carbon neutral business, it's just acknowledging that as an industry we need to work together and make a change. The big emitters, as well as the Institute, have set net zero or carbon neutral goals. and big brands are committing to this, as well as looking at renewables. And obviously we had a huge shift in political thinking with the change of federal government, and acknowledging that we need policy to make this happen. Compared to our projects, being a carbon neutral business is really only a small part, but it does play into how we lead as businesses, and how we sort of deliver our projects as well from an ethical point of view. And not doing so doesn't make good business sense. According to PowerShop, Australia's 2.4 million businesses emit 40% of the nation's carbon emissions. So we have to act now, and we all acknowledge that. And I know lots of people in the profession are looking at their sustainability action plans and how this ties into that process. So how are we going with the presentation? Is it coming up?
Perhaps I'll jump in with Bree's take on it. My slide wasn't super graphic, so perhaps I'll just fill a gap, save some time. It's interesting to think of the three of us with different scales of practice. And so I think what will be useful about this discussion is you might attach to certain things that each of us are doing. I guess our practice is about 20 full-time equivalent staff. Maybe you could just, so I can continue on this line of thread, just shoot through to the breathe slide. So yeah, companies have been certifying as carbon neutral since the early 2000s, but it didn't sort of come on to our radar until after the 2015 Paris Agreement that Sophie was just talking about, and the subsequent IPCC climate assessment reports that it really shifted focus toward limiting global temperature rise. And so knowing now the insufficiency of just carbon reduction for our planetary health, and that our regional climate has already warmed by 1.4 degrees, and that safe warming threshold of 1.5 will be exceeded, it's very clear that every fraction of a degree has an immense impact. And so organisational footprinting and strategic emissions reductions and offsetting is within our own sphere of influence. So since 2017, Breathe have used a consultant for our audit carbon credits and our certification. And when we started all of this, it sort of felt more available and more rigorous to be guided by professionals familiar with those kind of international standards and knowledge around the process itself. We went with the No CO2 program through the Carbon Reduction Initiative, which is one of the longest running climate change certification programs. And Sophie and Andy have followed a different method, so maybe it's helpful to compare and contrast as we progress through this discussion. So for us, the process involved mapping out our organisational footprint across the full value chain. You sort of can see here in this pie chart the types of things that we started surveying. So we tallied up the carbon associated with how we power our workplace, the electricity component here, which is scope 1 and 2 emissions, our expenses, staff travel and flights, waste, and the cost of sales. And we track our carbon neutral expenses too. We also track green power and other offsets that our practice have purchased. And then armed with that data, we can kind of make insightful decisions on how and where to optimise our emissions and be better set up from an accounting perspective to streamline it in future years. So changes can be behavioural, they can be technological, or they can be through emission offsets. But of course, the goal should be for all of us to optimise before we offset. And so some changes we implemented were, better waste management, implementing, better organics before FOGO was available through councils, and, doing soft plastics and an e-collect bin to divert all of our, superseded computer equipment from going to landfills. Some pretty obvious stuff. It can get a bit more nuanced and really related to practice values. We bought all of our staff keep cups and, switched to plant-based catering for all of our events. We paid for Bicycle Victoria insurance to encourage bicycle use, and bought an EV for the company. So it depends what's within your means and what sort of values align these kind of initiatives. We also paid, we obviously curbed air travel, which is often a big one here, and paid 100% green power for Breathe's operations. We also instigated a green power allowance for staff to switch their power at home, although that's kind of outside of the scope of all of this. And the audit itself, when we first started in 2018, cost us about $1,100. And we offset with various projects like a clean energy biomass initiative in India. And it initially cost us like $440 billed quarterly. But we rely on our broker, CRI, who has vetting criteria for the offsets, even beyond the national carbon offset standard. And we select projects that resonate with us and our values. But of course, it's not just about offsetting, it's about meaningful change. And seeing our place in the decarbonisation supply chain. Obviously, the same is true for the products we specify and the projects that we build and design and build as a whole. We can and should audit and optimise project carbon. But what's really important in both situations, whether it's a project or your practice, the data is really key. However imperfect as it is, it's an evolving process and it's changing all the time, but we really need to focus on progress, not perfection. I'll leave it back to Sophie. Maybe we can skip back.
Thanks, Bonnie. Interestingly, I guess our journey started around the same time that Breathe was really taking action, and I joined Architects Declare in 2019. And that was like exciting, but it was also a little bit daunting because there's a lot more information available now, which is fantastic. But it's also good to reflect back on the journey. So when sort of Breathe did the Instagram campaign that we were going to be carbon neutral by 2020, I wanted to jump on board and really be a part of that movement. But I looked into the climate active certification, which the government provides, and I just felt as a small practice, I didn't want to be working with another consultant. So you had to work independently with the consultant to do your audit, and then receive the certification through offsets. And it just all seemed quite complicated to me at the time. And out of the blue, I was contacted by a young tech entrepreneur who was creating a platform that could very easily measure your carbon emissions as a business and then align you with a certified offset scheme. And again, it was the scheme that I joined with Path Zero, was through South Pole, and it was a cement factory in Thailand where they were turning their use of fossil fuels into use of biomass. So the carbon reduction was really high. I initially wanted to plant trees in Australia. To me, that felt right. But the way it was explained was that within the global system, that this was the most efficient way of managing it. And I felt really good about this. It was a very, very simple platform, and it launched, and then I joined, and I encouraged other people to join. And it was a subscription process, and there was a regulatory audit at the end of the year. I received a certificate about how many tons of CO2 I had reduced. But around probably after 2 years, it coincided with me moving my office home. So I had been working, renting a larger office, and had an employee, and then we were subleasing to other architecture practices. And because of COVID, had to move my office back home, and then decided to keep it that way. So things changed. And it was also around this time that really a lot of businesses were starting to pick up on the being carbon neutral and using it. It was you started to see it everywhere. And I started to kind of, I guess because I'd moved my office home, started to really question, is this another expense that I need to pay? Like, I want to be carbon neutral, but possibly there's another way of doing it. I started to become a little bit skeptical about businesses that were making a lot of money out of these schemes. I started to think, shouldn't it be more of a not-for-profit situation? So Path Zero by this stage had just gone gangbusters, and I still really believe that they're a great company, and they're doing great things, and they enabled this process to be done quite simply. It was a lot of transparency as well that was involved. But because I sort of realised that I was working from home, I had an employee, but literally my carbon emissions were very, very small. So I stopped my subscription, but really started to focus, as Bonnie had said, on the ways that we can reduce our carbon emissions as a business, and the way that we operate. And so that's sort of where I got to. And I think, again, off the leadership of Breathe, started looking into the no CO2, sort of almost like self certification process. Because my business is so small, I can very easily assess my emissions. And then I'm at that stage now where I will look into how I do offset those emissions, but possibly looking at more of a platform that has more of a physical meaning and emotional meaning to me than the Cyan cement project in Thailand. But I think it's definitely it definitely, like, when you commit to being a carbon neutral business, it definitely drives the way that you think about everything else that you do, and how you deliver your projects as well. It all ties into, just wanting to do things better, and also being aware of, the impact that we have. So that's where I'm at. So, Andy.
Next slide, I think.
And I'll also unmute myself. So my name is Andy Mull. I'm one of the 3 directors at Envirotecture. And I'm going to talk a bit about sort of where we're at. I'm going to probably gloss over some of the practical things we've done in terms of emissions reduction, which you've all I've attempted to put on this slide that's up now, which I'm assuming is coming through. And what I want to talk about really is our relationship with certification and what's happened on that front. So we've been carbon neutral since about 2012, but we're not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest, but about then, and that's when everything was getting fully offset. We've always done all these things on here: green power, recycle everything you can, basically reduce your emissions as much as you can to start with. We had an interesting thing where we had solar gas boosted hydronics in the office, because when that was built, that was the best way to go. Technology moved and we updated that a few years ago. So there's a whole bunch of things around that. But I think for the purpose of today, what I've been finding most interesting is the certification aspect of this. And I've been down this rabbit hole several times. It's about my third major go. So a year and a bit ago, we ended up going through a company which did a lovely job. They're called Trace. It was mostly online. You basically give them all your data and you get a footprint, and then through them we offset everything. And that was totally good and well. I'm fairly skeptical about the numbers in all of this. It's nothing to do with them. It's just the whole industry. It's the same for our building projects. As the consultants you talk to will say, what answer would you like me to give? We can use whichever methodology you want to see the results for, which is getting better. And the neighbours paper that's out at the moment will help to solve that for buildings. But therefore, there's a lot of rubberiness in this. And it's, to be fair, it's because it's really hard. If it was easy, we wouldn't be talking about it. So what we did with Trace last time, and we'd always done before, is we worked out what our number was. We about double it, and then we just buy double the amount of offsets, because who knows anyway. Like, we're counting electricity, but we've already buying green power, so we've kind of triple counted that. But in the scheme of things, it's all, it doesn't make much odds from I guess, for what we do in terms of how we account and the financial aspect of it. So what happened a few months back was the people got in touch, years up, time to throw your data in the ring. Their business model has evolved and changed, and now it's best part of $1,200 in order to jump through those hoops. Our offsets were costing us, I don't know, $300-400 for a year. That's before we doubled them. So I'm looking at the financials and just going, as our company name suggests, we care about efficiency, but it turns out in every possible sense. And we're looking at spending $1,200 to verify offsetting maybe $300 or $400 worth of carbon. So that just doesn't work in my brain, which is unfortunate, because that's when my weekends disappeared. And what we've ended up coming to now is, and we're in the process of doing it, so it's not quite up on the website, but it will be soon, is we're using a couple of the online tools to basically throw in the very high level data that we can about the emissions we have. We're going to publish that and just basically have a spreadsheet online or table, whatever, and just go, this is how we've done it. By all means, if somebody wants to challenge our claims about being carbon neutral, I'm happy to get into a written or verbal argument or discussion about the thing. That's totally fine. But what we're really doing is we're just trying to go for the transparency. So it's like, this is what we've done in terms of these are our impacts. This is what we've done to offset our impacts. There you go. We think we're carbon neutral or carbon positive, as the case will be. And therefore, that's sort of how we're going to roll going forward. I think it's different at different scales. There's a point where you need the veracity of somebody auditing. But it's really been, I think, at our scale. So we merged with a lot of our lovely colleagues in Victoria at Tolino Edwards Architecture in December. So like, we're now about 10 or 12 people across 2 offices. So we've obviously got to factor that in now. Our Sydney office has the wonderful luxury of also the building is owned by one of the other directors, Dick Clark. So therefore, like, we can change the hydronic heating system because he owns the building. That's helpful. Victorian office not owned by us, and therefore we've got more challenges because we've got to deal with a landlord. So anyway, the point is we're going with the transparency thing. We think it's going to work well. We're happy to debate anyone who wants to argue about it, because we think the debate is actually useful. And I guess the other thing that I didn't mention that was kind of critical to us getting here, we've ended up doing a whole heap of passive house projects in like the design work we do. And we push fairly hard for clients to certify those. So I was in this really interesting place where it's like, well, we're telling people to certify this and it comes at a cost. But what are we doing about our carbon neutrality? And ended up, after going in a lot of circles, so the cost of certifying your passive house project is less than 1% of the cost of the project itself, potentially a lot less, depending on the size of the project. Whereas when I started looking at this and the cost of certification is 300% of the cost of the thing, that's when I'm like, hang on, this is a disconnect. And this is how we came to transparency as a way of just going, look, it's all out on the table, happy to talk about it. If you can show me a better way, if any of the carbon accounting people will give me their software and let me do it better, I'm happy to use it. But none of them will give us access to use it unless we use them for all the other services. And I share Sophie's cynicism about a large number of people making a lot of money from, to be blunt, not doing a great deal that is particularly useful. So on that note, it's probably time to have a discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. That was a really great description of the whole process that the Envirotech has gone through. I think that's really fantastic, and it's really great that we've got this presentation to work now. I realized that I was actually trying to share the presentation via Teams, not via Zoom. So, you know, you can do 1,000 of these presentations and still get very simple things wrong. So I'm very sorry, everyone. But yeah, now that we've got things working properly, I think it'd be really great to have a bit of a discussion between the three panelists about some of the big takeaways that you've been talking about. So first, I'd love to talk a little bit, for you to talk a little bit about leveling up. And I think that was great in your diagram that you had, Andy, where there was things that you could do more directly, and maybe that's where people start to feel like stuck, or like they're not sort of seeing the transparency. How did you sort of choose what to level up on, and when to finally sort of flop over and say, look, we'll just pay the extra and we'll sort of double up on the carbon credits?
We've done the doubling up for quite some time, to be honest, because we never were that sure. I mean, we're answering these questions, you're trying to find the data. Like, I mean, Bonnie made the point that they've rejigged their accounting system to do a better job of tracking that. We're much smaller, well, a bit smaller anyway, and certainly haven't done that over the years. And therefore it was quite hard to have confidence in a lot of the numbers. And that's where we just kind of went with the, we'll just add a bit here, add a bit there. And the thing that really ultimately got us was, we've got issues with the cost of carbon offsets anyway. I think they're still wildly cheaper than they need to be. And there's a wonderful paper at the moment out, which is all about the safeguard mechanism. And when you start digging into that, you realize that the cost of carbon offsets is going to go through the roof because everybody's been scamming it. Sorry, they've been playing by the rules they were given so far. So yeah, so look, we've been doing the doubling for a while, and the thing that kicked us back out of being certified by someone else was just literally the cost. And they've been lovely people. I have great conversations with them. I talk to the person there every couple of weeks to try to persuade them to do a cheap version for people like us, but for whatever reason they can't make the business model work. So
yeah. And Bonnie, did you want to talk a little bit more about sort of the scale of your practice and how that sort of, how you've been rolling that leveling up out there?
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting to compare and contrast here. And you could actually use projects as an example too when you're talking about offsets and where does the value really lie? Is it in the accounting component, or is it actually reinvesting in a better performing building, for example? Or is it in approximating what that end number of carbon equivalents might be, and then, you know, overcompensating? Like, it's pretty tricky when there aren't metrics. You know, there's no metrics for Australian carbon per square metre, for example, that are terribly reliable. And it's the same for offices. You know, it'd be great if we didn't need to do LCAs on every practice and project and use like a market norm and then add a redundancy factor. But it's just not there right now. So for us, with our projects and with our practice, and this is about this alignment, right? It's about leveling up to the global imperative and, you know, folding that through to the projects we do and the people that we are. But for us, like, the data is really key, and we need to understand and we feel accountable by doing it externally because we're busy and we can't get to it. And at that scale, you know, running the survey, we still need to do quite a lot of it internally. You know, we run the travel surveys, waste surveys, all of that stuff. But yeah, it just enables us to get across a little bit more by having an external party.
Yeah, okay. And Sophie, I mean, you know, you've sort of been more or less a sole practitioner with a couple of staff. I guess your impact would be quite low. So the idea of leveling up and paying all of this money when you've still got such a small practice, that's also where that sort of disconnect is and that discord. If you sort of continued to level up and not worry too much about the carbon offsets in that regard?
Look, I think it is different as a small practice, but there's a lot of small practices out there. So I think when I was first using Path Zero, it felt feasible in terms of an expense, in terms of a business expense. I know nothing's perfect, but my uncertainty about the offsetting schemes is probably driving my cynicism more than the actual process of being carbon neutral. And I think, there's discussions about not having enough offset programs. If we are, as we are, committed to moving beyond our businesses being carbon neutral and having our projects as carbon neutral, I think it ties into the whole equation. And I mean, like as Bonnie said, we can't wait for it to be right. But fundamentally, I'm just struggling a little bit with the whole sort of carbon offsetting through emissions, and that's being further exacerbated by the fact that there was news about South Pole, who I was like doing my offsets through, had been found that they're really cracking down on the legal side of things now, had been found to be misreporting the impact of their emission schemes. And so while there's this discussion about sort of saying that you're carbon neutral, I'm now quite concerned that because of all the greenwashing that's going on, there are actually, like the ACCC is cracking down on people using it as a marketing tool. And so there's, it just is, are we doing the right? We have to believe that we're doing the right thing, but I don't know, like, is it better to have rules or not? I don't know. I'm a little bit sort of obviously concerned at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's totally understandable. So I guess that sort of brings us to we've got quite a few questions about which platform everyone uses. So it'd be great if everyone just wants to. We've got Andy answering things, typing his answers in the Q&A panel, but if everyone wanted to mention who they have used to get their certification, that'd be great. And the Institute doesn't align itself with any one platform anymore. So it'd be really lovely to hear who you used, and then maybe we could have a bit of a discussion about how easy has it been working with consultants and also doing self-reporting, getting into the weeds there yourself and doing quite a lot off your own back.
Well, I'll talk while everyone else is typing if you want. So like I've said, we used our Trace as ones when we were getting certified with some auditing, and you can find them online, and they were good. It was just a money thing for us. We've been using the carbon neutral calculator since. It's fairly simple, which is both a blessing and a curse, and therefore most of the things a business owner can answer off the top of their head. Maybe not the electricity one, but it doesn't take much to find those. So we've found that like its simplicity is both its strength and its weakness. And that's where for us the transparency thing really kicked in, because we know that it's wrong. We'll admit that it's wrong, but it's like, this is the best we could think we can do. And therefore, if you can show me a better way, very happy. But that remains the approach we've taken. So can I just answer one of the other questions quickly? Someone's asked about a little bit about sort of this versus educating public and clients. For us, it's always a yes and kind of answer to almost every question we ever get. But really for us, this comes down to sort of your ability to, your credibility in what you're trying to do. And I really think that it's important that you're doing everything you possibly can. Otherwise, any message you're trying to communicate about why someone else should do it, it gets really messy very quickly, because, well, if you're not doing it, why should we do it? So I think a lot of it's just that is the answer. So yes, and to everything.
There was a question, where do you start the journey? There's so much information out there, difficult to know where to start though. I think just starting is a really, like anything, is a really good place to start. I think when you do commit to either working with a consultant or using an external software program business like Path Zero that I did, it's you start with the data. Like Bonnie's graph is really good in summarizing, how, or understanding how your business works, and I personally believe that's the best way to start, because by doing that, it really makes you just consider, even if you don't go down the path of full certification, it just really makes you conscious of, where your energy use lies, and as a business, what impact that is having.
Mm.
Sorry to jump in there, Bonnie. Just Sophie, when you're saying, just start anywhere, do you think it is a good idea to sort of organise some meetings with some different consultants or certification reps, and start to get any checklists that they might give you, so that you can get that?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think I think I did have quite a lot of conversations with different people before Path Zero sort of landed in my lap. But like anything, like working with any consultant, it has to be the right fit. And I do think that's a really, really good idea. Even having a look on the Architects Declare website, there's now information there on not all the pathways, but some of the pathways that you can take. And definitely, I think setting up a meeting or a phone call with different consultants is really good to get a feel for how they work, and their interest in this whole process as well. Because for me, the man who started Path Zero he really wanted to make a difference, and he really wanted to make it easy for business to do this, instead of, like, the software was just really good. Like, it's a very, very good program that did to me uncomplicate the whole process, and I really appreciated that at the time.
Yeah, I think that relationship with your auditor, or for us, was incredibly important in understanding, it's a different language. It's the same with projects, like understanding the impact of one element within your business or one material within your project. It's going to take a while for us to all understand how impactful it is. If you're starting, in your projects, it seems to be, should be starting with electrification, how we power it. That's clearly the biggest, item to start with. But in your practice, it's a little bit more granular. And so if you're working with for us, that relationship is important, because we could really field questions about the integrity of offsets and what are your criteria for determining whether it's a viable project. And we haven't spoken about what some of these criticisms are, but it's a lot to learn, the criticism of nature-based offsets Sophie was talking about before. You need an ally in this. So if you can find a consultant that's an ally, that's great. But if you're able to do your own research, that's equally as beneficial.
Yeah, I agree with Bonnie in this instance, because when I joined Path Zero, they actually had gone through that process of eliminating options for who you offset through. However, there wasn't an impartial discussion about why one really was better than the other. And I do feel like I probably just jumped in without maybe a sort of deeper understanding, and a consultant would be really good in that instance to advise. Yeah.
I feel that that's something that's going to evolve. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff happening in a regulatory sense at the moment that's going to force some stuff to change. But there's also, I guess, with everything, there's an element of you're putting some faith in the people that sell your stuff, whether it's a car or a house or carbon offsets. And there's a point where you can fall in the rabbit holes, and not saying they're not worthy rabbit holes, but also there's a practical moment where you just need to get on with, you know, running your business and designing things and all of that. So I think it's always very push-pull, but you do need to put some faith in those other people as well. But as to how much is tricky. And the South Pole things are mind blower, because, like, you know, they're huge. And if they're getting it wrong, then who knows? So yeah. Yeah. And
I
look,
guess that sorry.
Someone's asked a question about basically, would we get in trouble if we're claiming we're carbon neutral and we're not, if the ACCC were to throw the book at us? My reading of the rules around that is you can't make false claims. So I think we'd be locked in an argument about whether the claim was false or not, which is why we're going for the transparency argument. Whether we win that or not would actually be quite fascinating. But I'm also more of a, you know, forgiveness, not permission kind of person. So I'm comfortable with what we've done. But I think for me, it's a transparency that makes it work. And it's the random claims where there's nothing to back it up, where everybody's hackles just go up and go, this doesn't feel right. So I'd like to think that we've at least circumnavigated that part of the issue.
Yeah, at the big end, you know, you see, I think Disney certified through Vera, who had a number of programs that, for a lot of reasons, have lost their credibility. And for them, I think it's a counterclaim situation where they're, you know, it's their reputation, you know, whether or not they have a similar ACCC like concern or not, it's probably irrelevant. It's really about doing your due diligence because you're attaching your brand to it.
Exactly.
So I guess this sort of brings us I think certification, offsets and audits and transparency is sort of something that we can all talk about here in terms of your process and what you've found easy or worthwhile. Andy, I mean, I think when you were mentioning that, you know, you sort of had 3 rounds of giving this a go, obviously, I think when you take on the process of finding your offsets yourself, that takes you away from your desk to do your architecture work. How have you felt handling that? And do you think you'll end up going with a third-party consultant?
Look, a year ago, I thought we'd nailed it and I thought we'd never change, and then we changed. So the only certainty in life is change. I don't know. We use a company which I hadn't mentioned. The doubling that we do. We go through an organisation called 15 Trees, who are based in Victoria, who Talina, our new partner, uses and knows of. So we have a bit of faith in them because of the humans involved. So things like that, where you just end up with a relationship with people that we have no reason to question, we'll keep going with that. As to the rest of them, we'll probably ebb and flow over time. But we do spend a bit of time. It's a sort of, because we care, we sit there and you read things and, you know, you bookmark things. Someone's just mentioned the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. I've got no idea who that is, but I'm going to Google that later. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's who we put our carbon offsets through next time. So it will change. And yes, it does take time, but we do lots of things that take time because we care, and it's just the nature of being human.
There's a question in here from somebody about being overwhelmed by the paid certification options, about the cost. For the self-certification options that you've been looking at, Andy and Sophie, like, are there any, what are the costs associated with those?
Time plus the offsets.
And so the actual certification doesn't have a fee?
Well, there is no certification. It's literally self, as in I said I am certified.
Oh, sure, no certificate because it's no party. Yeah.
No
but there's no subscription fee or anything associated with using that software or platform.
No, we've just been using that freebie one because all the others have locked them down, and you know, they put money into developing them. I get that, but yeah, the fact that I couldn't find something that I felt was reasonably priced for what it was.
Yeah, it would be amazing if there was a global national transparency on what the General Office, for example, reduces, because then you can add your redundancy value and just do that. And then you're feeling good because you've done something equivalent, because it's all best guess as it is. And maybe that's where you start, you know.
Yeah, it's an
Like
interesting because it's your business. It's not having any impact on your clients in a way, unless it's, I think, in a way, I say that because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about B Corp, which I know Breathe are, and to get through that rigorous process represents a business that's really committed to being, you know, ethical and sustainable and just doing the right thing in terms of reducing impact. And so I do think, even though I'm still quite cynical about things, I do think there is validity in the actual certification as a business. And I guess, look, I was always looking for the Institute for Leadership on this, and I always feel it'd be great if we were aligned, and there, you know, if it was within our what we have to deliver as part of our in our, like, I can't think of the term, but what our requirements are for delivering. And at the moment, it's an opt-in situation, and I think outside of architecture, businesses have really been using it as a marketing sort of tool. But I think as architects, we are generally very ethical about, not everyone, but generally ethical about what we do. So not quite sure what my point is, other than that I think that like there is, I certainly, with products, I lean toward, I want to be using FSC certified products, or products that are certified. It does put a lot more trust in a product. So maybe that, I think Breathe are there with that understanding, and like holistically as a profession, that certification probably does validify us professionally.
And it's sort of can be a prerequisite for other kind of platforms to advertise your practice as well, through B Corp, through the World Green Building Council's Net Zero Buildings platform, where if you're a certified practice, you need to be carbon neutral. There are starting to be reasons why it might make sense from a marketing perspective. To obviously that's not the end goal, but if we're all talking about the same thing, it's a positive thing.
And I think it also shows that you're leading by example by actually doing the thing that we ask our clients to do.
Absolutely.
As Andy was mentioning, we want our buildings to be certified as meeting the performance objectives that we've tried to design into our buildings. And if the question of cost or process comes up, you can always say, yeah, we did it with our business, or we've done it with our office, to show that it is possible. And you also have a first-hand understanding of the cost and the process, which I think is really important. And I think it's also really interesting to think about what we do with our clients versus what we do in our offices, because we have had a few people mention in the Q&A window about, we still need to make sure that we're doing as much as we can in our buildings. So when you look at how big of an impact your office might have, because so many people who are practicing in the sustainability space are leading by example, that there's so much more that can be done in your projects. So is that also a factor that that each of you bring into your consideration when you're going through the ongoing upkeep of the carbon neutral process that you're going through?
Sorry, in the sense of relationship.
I was typing a response. Sorry. Was this about projects and how we respond to projects?
Or this was more about if you're doing as much as you can on your projects, and we know that the impact that we can make is probably bigger on the projects that we're working on, especially considering the offices that we occupy might already be carbon neutral certified or are not making as big of an impact because they've already been built or they've been there for dozens of years potentially. So I guess my question was, do you factor in how better your buildings are or how high performing your buildings are into the way that you consider your carbon neutral certification as an office?
If I'm interpreting you correctly, Dan, you're talking about mixing our product footprint versus our operational footprint.
Yeah, that's right.
The two are accounted very differently. I think, that's where you have a life cycle analysis for a building, whereas you have a different kind of spreadsheet for your practice. But they are all of these discussions about decarbonisation, whether you certify, whether you don't certify, it doesn't matter. The importance is just decarbonise. It's imperfect, but progress, not perfection.
I was going to say, we'll look back to that whole thing. Better to do something than nothing. Better to do it today than tomorrow. Just get on with it.
Yeah, I agree.
And you're wrong. Every time you're wrong.
And we don't need to have a discussion about the terminology as well. I think at the moment there's like, we can't say it's sustainable, it's regenerative. Yes, we all want to be making a positive impact and we want to be doing our projects regeneratively, but people haven't even got their head around things being sustainable. So I think people can get caught up in semantics, and like as a practice, we are always trying to educate our clients on ways to reduce energy and have a better, like essentially a better performing home. But then, now moving into the life cycle consideration of the building materials and what impact that has. And I think this is going to be more challenging, to be honest, because to say, a building is carbon neutral, you can only achieve that with offsets. So, but we're heading in that direction, which is fantastic. And like our philosophy is just do less, or just do it better. Like just really be conscious of what you're doing, and try and have less of an impact on the environment, and just be kind to the environment, and then that creates kindness to the clients, and just it is all part of a bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've started to see people drop off. I think it's time maybe for lunch, but it's fantastic that we've had pretty much 300 people sticking with us throughout this entire conversation. So we might wrap up there. Thank you so much, Sophie, Bonnie, and Andy, for joining us today. It was really great to hear your some information about the process that you've gone through. And I think one of the big takeaways that I received when we had our pre-event discussion was, the real aim of the game at the moment, with so much still in development in this space, is to give it a go, start communicating with some of the providers, and start the process to see what will actually what needs to be factored into becoming a carbon neutral practice, if certification is still one of those things where we're not sure exactly what that means. From an institute perspective, we are trying to help smaller practices navigate this space, because it is quite hard and maybe not everyone has all of the funds to jump in there and do this. So we just need to go through a few steps here to make sure that we are aligning ourselves with the right platform, and we're working with CAST, our Sustainability Architecture Forum, to know who that might be. So thanks again. Thank you so much to Andy, Sophie, and Bonnie, and we hope everyone has a pleasant carbon neutral journey in their practice. Please keep the conversation alive. Andy's always there to debate with, as he said. So yeah, please keep talking about this, and keep talking to the Institute so that we can find ways to support you ongoing. So thanks everyone, and have a fantastic week.
Thank you all. Take care.